So it's the first Sunday of Advent. Advent comes from Latin words meaning arrival, approach, coming. If somebody is coming, if somebody is arriving, we on our end are waiting. And if we're waiting, we're preparing for them to come in some way. When our son comes with his wife and our granddaughter, we prepare. You know, we vacuum the house, we get all the breakables up on high levels on mantles so she can't get to them. We block off stairways so she can't climb up and down and so on. If somebody is coming, we tend to prepare as we wait. Now, you know, so the waiting at Advent is more than just lollygagging. It's not loitering. It's actually intentional and meaningful. We prepare our lives for the one who is coming. The psalm that begins, "You, O Lord, I lift my soul," is a prayer. And it's saying, how will I prepare for the coming of the Lord? I will lift my soul. Now, it's a prayer, and you know, Hebrews in the Middle East, the prayer posture was not like this. You know, we tend to pray like this, hunched down. They prayed with their arms spread and their eyes lifted and their body open. You know, they were open to receive God. They were vulnerable to receive God. You know, I'm not quite sure what the origin of our praying like this is, but it's kind of a defensive position, and, you know, God can't quite get in. You know, I lift my soul. The word in Hebrew for soul is nephesh. It also means neck. Nephesh, soul, in Hebrew was understood to mean the whole human being, who we are in our totality, what it is that makes us who we are, what it is that makes us human. You know, and nephesh, neck, you know, is a word of connection, isn't it? It connects the head to the rest of the body. It connects, you know, the nerve center, the thinking, what we might tend to say is the upper part, the higher person, to the body, the lower part. But nephesh, neck, is a word of connection. If we don't have a neck, we're really not alive. You know, take out your neck. What are you? You're just an accumulation of organs and limbs without existence. So nephesh, neck, is important to our bodies, and soul is important to our lives. The God breath that is breathed into every human being comes in and goes through our neck to our body. It's what makes us human. So nephesh is a word of connection. Connection to God, connection to our neighbor, connection to the earth. And it can kind of stand out to what it means by contrasting it to self. Self is the soul minus God. You know, self is a word of kind of isolation. It's kind of a word of being cut off, self-absorbed, self-centered, self-righteous. You know, it's all about me. Yeah. Soul You know, we use soul for soul music, soul food, soulful eyes. Yeah. It's a richer word that encompasses all of who we are. So I lift my soul to God. I lift my whole being, all of whom I am, all my relationships, all my connections. I lift them to the Lord. I want to connect all of that to God. The next line is, "Oh my God, in you I trust." Trust. One of the fundamental searches in our life is for trustworthiness, isn't it? For a person we can trust. I'm looking for a mechanic. Do you know somebody I could trust? I'm looking for an electrician. Do you know somebody I could trust? I'm looking for a partner. Is there somebody that I can trust? Is there somebody that will trust me? You know, in our relationships, if we don't have trust, we have almost nothing. If we can't trust our partners, where are we? If we can't trust our children, where are we? If children can't trust their parents, where are we? You know, it's awful not to trust, to have that doubt, to have that, you know, wondering, and then it gets to the point of checking up and following up. Can this person be trusted? When we find somebody we can trust, you know, it becomes foundational in our life. And when we find that one thing we can trust, it becomes the springboard for everything else in our life. I mean, I know that because I can trust Susan, I am free to move about into the world and to trust other people. Yeah. Trust is a wonderful thing. In you, O Lord, I trust. So this waiting, who we wait for is often whom we trust. I'll wait on Susan because I trust her. And who we trust is who we'll wait for. You know. So the first part of Advent is, for whom are we waiting? Well, the prayer says we're waiting for the Lord, in whom we trust. Second question of Advent is, for what are we waiting? Well, the psalm says salvation. I'm waiting for the salvation of the Lord. Now, salvation can be what we want to be saved from or what we want to be saved for. In this psalm, the psalmist lists three things for which he wants to be saved. One is, save me from my enemies. Save me from those who would shame me. Well, yeah, I want to be delivered from that kind of situation too. I want to be delivered from those who belittle me, those who don't have my best interests at heart. Interesting, in this psalm, the psalmist says that, save me from those who would shame me. But then he goes on to point two, the thing he wants to be saved for, is, Lord, teach me your ways. Teach me your goodness. Teach me your righteousness. I might want my enemies wiped out from the face of the earth. I might want them to really get it. But in this psalm, the psalmist doesn't say, give it to my enemies, punish them. The psalmist says, teach me your ways. It's like the psalmist is saying, teach me how to deal with my enemies. Teach me how to relate to my enemies. It's not take away this situation. It's help me work through this situation. Give me the skills and the ability to deal with my enemies. I mean, that's just fascinating to me. I want my enemies wiped off from the face of the earth. I want them punished. I don't often pray, save me from that kind of anger so that I can deal constructively with my enemies. The third thing the psalmist wants to be saved from is some sin of his youth. Deliver me from my youthful transgressions. Save me from the stupid things I did, and don't let them hold me back. In verse 15, the psalmist says, lift my feet from the net that holds me down. Lift my feet from what's holding me back. Lift me from the burden of guilt so I can move on. What the psalmist is praying for is a new beginning. That's the salvation that the psalmist is praying for, is a new beginning. I want a new beginning with my enemies. I want a new beginning of moving forward in righteousness. I want a new beginning of being released from the burden of the past. That's salvation, is a new beginning. And we have various ways we would define salvation. Not everybody uses it the same way. In our AA class this fall, we talked about salvation in a 12-step program would be equated to recovery. A person's recovery from their addiction is salvation. So recovery can be salvation from alcohol or drugs, but it can also be recovery from greed and anger and vengeance. Salvation could be, and the word is salvage. Salvage part of my life. Salvage what's left of my life. We've witnessed the fires and the floods and the hurricanes where people salvage their lives. They know they can't have it like it was, but they want the peace that gives them meaning to be salvaged. Salvation could be reaching my potential and not wasting my time. Salvation could be doing what God's yearning for me is. Salvation could be connecting to God, and it could be saving me from myself. In verse 8 of this psalm, there's a transition. The first 7 verses of this psalm are written in the second person. It's very personal. It's a prayer between God and the psalmist. To you, I lift my soul. In you, I trust. I want you to lead me in your paths. I want to learn your righteousness and goodness. It's just personal. You're just talking to God, which is what prayer is. But then in verse 8, the psalmist switches to the third person. It's no longer, I trust in you, I want to learn your goodness. The psalmist changes to, God is good. God is upright. God is righteous. It's like the psalmist has tried it. Okay, I tried trusting God. I tried lifting my soul to God. And you know what? It worked. I tried this mechanic, and you know what? She's good. I tried this electrician, and you know what? He's good. And I think you ought to try this electrician. I got my car from this dealership, and you know what? They're trustworthy. I think you ought to get your car from this car dealership. The psalmist moves from this personal, intimate relationship with God to becoming something of an evangelist, telling other people in whom they can lift their soul and in whom they can trust. You know, I tried it, and it works. My best example, I think, of trying something that I wasn't sure on was, I've said this before, tithing. You know, I never tithed before. A friend told me, you know, once I started tithing, I never worried about money anymore. And I thought, wow, I worry about it all the time. I think I'll tithe. And you know what? He was right. He was right. It worked. What the psalmist is doing here is basically being a beggar, showing other beggars where the bread is. I was looking for someone to connect to that I could trust. And I found that in God. And it worked. And I'm encouraging you to find your trust in God. It's one beggar showing another where the bread is. Now, speaking of bread, it's Communion Sunday. We begin communion by saying, "The Lord be with you," and you respond.
Also with you.
And then what's the next line? Don't look! What's the next line? Lift up your hearts. Sometimes heart is a replacement word for, what do you think? Soul. So it's really, we lift up our souls. We lift up our souls. We lift up the wholeness of who we are. We lift up that which makes us human. We lift up our connection. We lift up our relationships. We lift up our failures. We lift up our hopes and our dreams. And as we lift them up, we say, we trust in you, O Lord. It's a pretty good prayer, and it's a great way to begin Advent. You know, the Lord is coming, and we're waiting, and we're preparing. And how do we prepare? Each day, we lift up our souls, for in you we trust. May it be so. Amen.